Hello and welcome to Emotions in Human Design. I'm Sandy Freshy, Human Design Specialist, and I'll be your guide through this course material. In this introductory module, you're going to learn how you can begin to free your life from emotional drama. Now, you know what I'm talking about when I use the term emotional drama. If you are a person who is easily overwhelmed in emotional situations, or if your judgment gets clouded by emotions when you need to make a clear decision. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you thought you were clear, where you thought you were calm, and you had an encounter with someone and it got out of hand? And before you knew it, you or the other person is storming off and you're wondering what just happened. Well, if this has ever happened to you, and if you've ever shut down your emotions, or if they've ever escalated, or if you've ever been accused of being moody or overly emotional, this course is going to help you unravel and understand how you can become more aware of your emotions, more accepting, more allowing of yourself and others. And then in that awareness, acceptance, and allowance, you can begin to release the patterns that keep creating the emotional drama in your life. You don't have to let emotionally difficult situations get out of hand, and you don't have to get stuck in hurt feelings or patterns of conflict that just continually repeat themselves. You know, those kinds of conflicts where it's that thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again. You can break free of those situations and those patterns. You don't have to go through life feeling overwhelmed or feeling like you're too sensitive or too moody, or even being judged for not being emotional enough. You can learn to manage your emotional life in a way where you can be very aware and awake so that you can navigate your emotional sticking points by first understanding them with clarity and then working with them with grace and empowerment. So this is where we're going to be going in this course material as we progress. So in order to begin your enlightened journey toward a deeper level of emotional awareness, you need to know two things. Number one, emotions aren't personal. They're actually chemical reactions that are created by the body in response to a stimulus. Now that doesn't sound personal at all, does it? And it's because we're these physiological supercomputers, meaning that data goes in via stimulation. It goes into our bodies and the body responds to that stimulation. Now, if the mind gets involved, then thoughts and beliefs are formed, which then elicits a further chemical or physical response. And when you recognize this, you kind of take away the charge that contributes to much of the toxicity and judgment that we can hold on to, especially when we're feeling like we're not having, or another person is not having, a correct emotional response. So let's break this down into real life here. Let's say that someone says something to you that hurts your feelings. There's a lot of chemistry that happens between the split second that the person says that thing and the other split second where you have a response to it. And that's where the chemical reaction happens. And it can happen because of maybe grooves in your conditioning where you have been conditioned to either not feel good about yourself in a certain way. Maybe it's due to a trauma or past abuse or an experience that you've just not quite resolved. And then here comes this person who may not even know what's going on with you and says this one thing that hurts your feelings. And that's your response to the stimulus. And then you may interpret the response as not being okay. Maybe you get defensive and snap at the person. Or maybe you feel like you need to keep a brave face. Or, maybe this is a boss that criticizes you and you don't feel that you have the power to say or do anything about it. And then that sets off a cascade of judgment, perhaps even shame, a feeling that maybe you're less than, which then creates more and more chemical reactions that can eventually lead you to a place where you're feeling sad, depressed, angry, all of those things that we put these labels on as we move through life. So, number one, emotions aren't personal. They're chemical reactions that are created by the body in response to a stimulus. And then we attach meaning to it. Nothing has meaning until we give it meaning and we define how it is. And we can tell ourselves that all day long. But until you really raise your awareness so that you understand your power within that, it seems as though it's all your fault. So just let go of all of that judgment as well and just understand for now that emotions are not personal. Number two, what most people don't realize is that there are two emotional operating systems. Humans are born with one of these two systems. Half of the people in the world consistently live in a sea of emotional ups and downs and emit that energy out into the world. We'll call these people emotional emitters for the time being. And then the other half of the people in the world do not have a consistent experience with their emotions, but instead they take in the emotions from the emitters, the emotional emitters, and then they amplify that emotional energy. So we'll call these people emotional amplifiers. So you are either an emotional emitter or an emotional amplifier. Emotional emitters need to know that they have this kind of an operating system because this is what they need to work with, their emotional ups and downs. This is what they need to understand about themselves in order to make clear decisions that are really good for them. Now, emotional amplifiers are extremely empathic because they're feeling those emotions of the emotional emitters. And this is one of their superpowers, so to speak. This is one of the gifts that this particular operating system, the emotional amplifying operating system, enables this person to have. So you may think that you know which operating system you have, but odds are, especially if you're an amplifier, you may actually think that you have the other operating system. When you're trying to deal with emotions in the opposite way of how your emotional operating system works, it can create a whole lot of chaos and confusion in your life. It's because you're either making decisions too hastily because you're not feeling through the ups and downs of your emotional cycle, or it's because you're dealing with emotions that aren't even yours. So imagine how much less chaos and confusion you can have in your emotional life when you understand which emotional operating system you have and how to work with it. We know which system you have by looking at your genetic hardwiring. Now, don't worry, you don't have to give over any blood or spit or any bodily fluids to find out which emotional operating system you have. You can find out by looking at your human design chart. And this is what we're going to be going into as we move into this course. So let's just back up for a moment and talk about what the human design chart is for those of you who are not familiar with human design. The human design chart uses your birth information to produce a visual representation of your overall human operating system, of the way that you are designed to operate, how you're hardwired, so to speak, from the source of your genetic coding. And your emotional operating system is part of this overall way that you're hardwired to operate. So the human design chart shows you the whole blueprint of the various energies and themes that are prominent in your life. It's the blueprint of what makes you an individual. So your chart is different from everyone else's. And when looking at emotions, you can tell how you're hardwired to deal with emotions by looking at the center that we call the emotional solar plexus center or the solar plexus center. The solar plexus center governs our emotional chemistry. And when you know how your solar plexus center operates, you lay the foundation for a new level of awareness. And from your awareness, you have the potential to create a better relationship, first of all, with yourself and then with others. Because you understand what's actually going on when you're having the chemical reactions in your body as a response to a stimulus. So, when you look at your emotions or your emotional experience through the lens of human design, you can begin to neutralize those toxic feelings of judgment and shame and trying to control your moods and all of these things where you were taught that it wasn't good to have those feelings, because you're going to understand, first of all, why you have those feelings, why you have those emotional responses, and second, how you're actually hardwired to deal with emotional energy. And then you'll begin to get wise at how you can be more at ease with yourself. And isn't that really the idea in life? To move through life being at ease with ourselves, being at ease with who we are, and not necessarily getting caught up with things that are emotionally challenging. Yes, emotions can be challenging. However, when you know how to deal with the way that you work with emotional energy, you're going to see things with a deeper level of compassion. You're going to see yourself and others with a deeper level of compassion and acceptance. And ultimately, you're just going to feel more empowered and more in control of your experience when it comes to dealing with emotions. So, part one of this course covers the mechanics of emotions. This is where you're going to find out which emotional operating system you have. You're going to discover if you're an emotional emitter or an emotional amplifier. And this one thing could actually change your life, but there's more. After you discover whether you're an emotional emitter or an emotional amplifier, you're going to learn about both systems, because odds are that half of the people you deal with have a different system than what you have. And you need to understand how they operate as well as how you operate, so that you will be able to see that emotions are truly not personal. This is where you'll get the knowledge that leads to power, your power to be more aware and accepting of yourself and others, and the power to stop fighting against your emotional experience and instead grow with it. And this in and of itself is going to improve your emotional life right off the bat. Along with that, in part one, you're going to get new insights into how emotionally charged situations get out of hand. You're really going to understand, because you're going to understand the two systems, how drama happens. But I'm not going to leave you hanging there, because then you're going to get the basics of how to begin to manage your emotions effectively in the way that you were actually designed and hardwired to manage emotions. So you're going to get that foundation where you can start to work with your own emotional operating system, while you're also aware that other people may operate differently. So once you have your foundation in part one, we're going to get more specific about your emotional operating system. So part two will be geared toward emotional emitters. Now, if you are an emotional amplifier, you will want to watch part two, because part two will give you a lot of insight into what you're actually experiencing in an amplified way. So part two is called Emotional Emitters and the Emotional Wave. And basically, emotional emitters ride in a wave of emotions. So you're going to discover how emotional emitters can ride through their emotional cycles. So this wave pattern that emitters experience, that they live in, is a whole emotional cycle that really needs to be understood in order to gain clarity and awareness. This is going to give emotional emitters and those of you who are amplifiers who are just watching and learning insight into how emotional emitters deeply affect others. And they do very, very deeply. This is why amplifiers are going to want to watch this. You're also going to learn about and understand the cycles of emotional ups and downs, of emotional emitters' ups and downs. And then you're going to learn about the 3 different types of emotional waves. And this is really important for emotional emitters to understand how their wave cycle works, how the ups and downs of their cycle works, because this is what brings them the clarity when they need to make decisions. And once emotional emitters understand the 3 different types of waves, then they can begin to craft an understanding of how their personal emotional wave works. And this is where all of the power of awareness is for emotional emitters, is in understanding their personal wave. So part 2 is basically about the wave mechanics for people who have that emotionally emitting operating system. Part 3 is geared toward emotional amplifiers. Emotional amplifiers have the gift of emotional empathy. So emotional amplifiers are going to get a lot of insight about how they're deeply affected by emotional energy. And those of you who are emitters, you want to watch this as well, because you're really going to get that inside understanding, that inside track into how you're actually affecting people with the ups and downs of your emotions. And this is going to help you to understand why sometimes things seem to get out of hand emotionally. So emotional amplifiers have this potential to develop deep wisdom about how to work with emotional energy, because they do take it in, they absorb it and amplify it. So in addition to getting this insight about how they're deeply affected by emotional energy, they're also going to come to understand their potential self-protective mechanisms and how they can impair that gift of emotional empathy. So there's a tendency to shut down at times and to react at times. And this stands in the way of emotional amplifiers really understanding how they can use their gift. And in addition to that, emotional amplifiers are going to learn the basic steps to becoming a master at managing emotions without being overwhelmed by them. So, as we move forward with part 1 of really understanding that emotions aren't personal, that there's actually a mechanical way that the 2 operating systems work, and then as we take that into understanding those 2 separate operating systems, you're going to find that you're going to be so much more enlightened and aware and open than you ever were before. And you're going to see that just by understanding how the 2 emotional operating systems work, and then as you begin to work with your specific operating system, the drama in your life that's caused by conflict and sticky situations and patterns that tend to repeat themselves over and over again and maybe escalate and get out of hand, that's all going to start to even out, because you're going to know what you're equipped with and how to work with the chemistry that you're feeling in your body in a way that keeps you grounded and operating under your own power. So I look forward to continuing with you in part 1 of this series. If you haven't signed up yet, please go to the link that's provided. And once you sign up, you will receive all the things that you need to get prepared for parts 1, 2, and 3 of Emotions and Human Design.